So, Avi, would you like me to just start sharing, or would you share the screen first?
No, first I'm going to check that we're going live. Okay, yes, we are live on YouTube. So we are good to go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another meeting. How are you, Vitaly?
I'm doing wonderful. I have flowers and everything. I don't think I can complain.
Is it on purpose that the flower match your shirt, or is
Frankly, not really, but you can always live with serendipity in your life, right?
Okay, good. If you're watching on YouTube, I would ask you to come here to Zoom with us, because it's going to be the fun part. Is going to see everyone together, and so the link is in the description. Please refresh your YouTube link and see if you can get a direct link to Zoom, and then you can just join us directly. Okay, so we're gonna start in 10 minutes or so. In the meantime, we can talk to a few people. Who here is from the United States? Anyone here? From afar?
Probably a bit too early yet.
It's morning there.
Very early morning. I mean,
Actually, I'm
I
here
get
from
that.
the US.
Oh, wonderful.
this?
Welcome, Christine.
Thank you.
Hey, where are you from in the US?
I'm in Denver, Colorado.
Oh, so it is early there, right? It's like
Yeah,
6,
7 a.m.
7. Wow. So how come? How come you decided to wake up so early? This is your morning, usual morning?
No, it's a little bit early, especially to start a webinar, but the subject sounds so interesting. I figured I would just get up and listen.
Oh, okay, good, good. Thanks for joining us. Who's here from Europe? Probably more people. Who wants to talk?
I am from Austria.
Austria.
Oh,
Who is
welcome,
this?
Nan Lin, I believe.
Yes.
Oh, Nanlina. So show us yourself if you can. Austria.
Okay.
Vitaly, have you ever been to Austria?
Yes,
Hi.
many times. Absolutely love Austria, of course.
Well, I've never been to Austria. This is interesting. What did you do there?
Oh,
Um,
yeah, that's probably a question for Nan.
and to me,
Yes.
I was born here and I study information design here.
Information design.
Mhm.
Is it information architecture in sorts?
No, it's a mixture of everything, like media design, graphic design.
Oh, okay. Cool. Thanks for
Well, that
joining
sounds
us.
like fun.
People are coming in slowly. Vitaly, who would you like to talk to? Do you know?
Sorry, I think that you interrupted. You broke up for a second.
I said, do you want to talk to someone? Do you know anyone here? I just
I'm-
want to spend the next 7 minutes to
Yeah,
kind of.
it is very nice to actually be able to see faces all of a sudden. This is a little bit unusual at these wonderful times now. Although I think it should be pretty much back to normal in Israel now, is it?
Yes, I'm in Tel Aviv, and yes, I can tell you that the vaccines work. People
Okay.
are enjoying themselves, going out to restaurants, to clubs. This is
So
great.
you have forgotten what masks look like now at this point.
Today was lifted. We can take off our masks if we're walking in the streets, not in public places apparently yet. But it's like almost. I mean, yesterday I was in a gym and I was like, "What? People are taking off their masks and it's crazy." So
Well, it's not like that here in Germany. This is going to take a while. Probably in Austria as well.
anyone else is enjoying the good life somewhere?
At home, maybe.
Ah, okay.
Don't know if you remember me from last year, but I'm in the UK now, not in Israel anymore.
Hey, of course, I do remember. Do you remember Lola? No.
No?
Vitaly.
Me? I'm
Yeah,
not
we
sure.
met.
I'm not sure.
I think she
We
was in your
did?
workshop too. But
Really?
what are you
Wow.
doing?
Usually I'm very good with faces, but not today apparently.
Moved
What
to
are you doing there?
London.
But what are you doing there? How
A
did
UX
you?
design. I'm product manager and UX specialist.
Ah, okay, good. Thanks for joining us here. So I will spend the next 5 minutes to show some slides that I prepared, and then we can start. So play. I'm going to have to share my screen first. And people, mute yourself.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come in.
Yes, mute yourself, people. Share. Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to Making Remote Work. It's really cool to have you. I think there's a lot of stuff that we cover today, but before we continue, I want to kind of share a little bit about this idea of like we're online, right? So please, everyone, introduce yourself in the chat. Let's get to know each other. Tell us where you're from. What do you do? Things like that. Let's get the chat rolling. And if you all remember this type of event where everyone really, do you remember such an event? You're probably there.
Yes, I remember.
This looks really
something
strange.
similar. No, why?
So many
hold on.
people.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. I mean, I remember these times, good old times. Are they coming back anytime soon, Avi?
I hope next year we can have something like this. But the point I'm showing this is because when we used to go out to these events, you know, we were mentally like prepared to just be, you know, absorbing information. But today in the online, it's like distraction everywhere. The phone is there. You can, you know, mute yourself and leave. But I say to you, take the opportunity to really turn off all the distractions, and really focus on this for the next hour or two, if you can, because you know, different to what we had to, you know, we used to dress up and go out to the venue and sit, and at the end we would like ask questions. I would say to you, engage throughout the meeting today. Write questions. And you know, Vitaly, sometimes I'm amazed how people answer each other and talk to each other and get to know each other this way. And this is the essence of the live event, the core of the live event, because you know, if you watch it later on YouTube, you're not going to enjoy that chat and you know, interacting with people. And often when we watch things later, we don't really focus because, you know, we can always fast forward, or we just dedicate just a little bit of our time. So I would say to you, turn off distractions and be with us completely for the hours. And this is Vitaly, and you're going to get to know him in a minute. Soon, later this month, we're going to have a practical UX research workshop, 3-day workshop. If you're interested in UX research, if you want to enhance your skills, sharpen your skills in UX research, welcome to join. There's a 3 event. After that, we're going to, wait a minute, someone mute yourself. Wait a minute, let's see if I can mute people here. People? Hold on. Who is speaking here?
Oh, I think it's all fine now.
Okay. Share screen.
In the meantime, Avi, there is Zolin wondering what's the meeting passcode trying to log in with my mobile phone.
Oh, I think that you should be able to log in with the link, but let me get back to you on that. Okay. So later we're going to have Designing for Emotion Masterclass. It's Aaron Walter. If you don't know, he wrote the book Designing for Emotions. Great book. And he's going to speak about designing for the complex emotions of our customers using fundamental principles of design and psychology. It's a best-selling book. It's really cool and really good guide to learn from. So you're welcome to join. Later in September, Vitaly, we're going to have a form design masterclass.
Oh, really? Are forms still important, Avi?
Tell me, Vitaly, I mean, how much information can you have about forms? What's
Oh,
going on?
frankly, I think that you can actually spend probably days thinking about forms, because it doesn't matter what interface you take. In the end, it will all boil down to forms. You want some kind of interaction with your customers, and that could be filters, search, input, actual contact forms, checkouts, and everything in between. And the thing is, we know from studies, of course, that if your design isn't good enough, if it's not fast enough, if the filling in the data isn't fast enough, people will leave. So my job has been for the last couple of years trying to find better ways to deal with forms. And so I'm very, very happy to put all of this stuff together in a workshop we're going to run, as I heard now, in September. Very much looking forward to it.
Yes, 3 days.
3 days on forms, Avi. This is totally out of
It's
control.
unbelievable, but I feel there's a lot to learn, definitely, and I'm looking forward to it. Okay, so it's all in uxsalon.com/events, and follow us. There's also t-shirts if you want to get. I'm going to go through. If you're following on Instagram, if you're not following on Instagram, please follow UX Salon on Instagram. There's so many interesting things that I'm posting there, and you get to hear about the events and behind the scenes as we go along. And that's it. So Vitaly, I want to get going. Let's start. You can start sharing.
Excellent. Thank you. So let me just move right here, and off we go. And I think we should be able to see just the waves and nothing else yet, but the slides are coming in first.
I'm going to paste in the chat, whoever needs to get someone in, here's the link to the chat. Here's the link to the Zoom registration. So just register and get in the chat. So if you want to get people to, if you want to get your friends to come in with you, please use this chat.
Excellent. Thank you, Avi. So from my end, hello everyone, welcome. First things first, I don't want it to be like a boring webinar kind of thing. I want it to be more like a conversation. Over the last couple of years, we all had to do something with this thing that we all know about. And this has become a problem for some organizations and has become more like the lucky moment for some other organizations. And so all of us have some experiences around.
I think you're muted.
I think I was muted. Avi, you muted me. How dare you?
Okay.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. Right. So in the end, we all have our experiences, right? And that's, I think, a very important part, because just over the last 2 years, I had to deal with many different clients, small and large. And for some of them, remote has become a big problem. For some of them, remote has become a big blessing. And I think that most of us are somewhere in between, right? And one important thing about all of this is that we all have experiences to share. So I want to encourage you to kind of participate with me in this journey. And I'm going to ask questions, and please go ahead and reply to them in the chat. I can always track the chat, or also on voice if you want to. That's perfectly fine. And it's probably going to be, I think, like 1 hour plus-ish, right? So feel free to take a coffee at any point. You will not miss anything. Everything is being recorded anyway. All right, everything okay from your end? Yes, everybody feeling fine? There's this new thing that's, in the Zoom etiquette. So if somebody agrees on something with the person who is speaking, they write a plus in the chat. And if they disagree, they write a minus in the chat. So please write a plus if everything looks good to you. All right, and I can see that. I can see that there are actually real people behind the scenes. Now, excellent. As we move on here, right, again, just looking back over the last 2 years, that's been a journey. It's been a journey for all of us. But for me, it was a really particular journey because I really tried to figure out not only how to make remote work better in some way. I mean, we've been working as remote workers for like 10 plus years, so it wasn't really a big change to me at all. But the more fundamental change was dealing with people who are not used to remote work. That was one side. And that kind of affected in many ways workflows, processes, design work, workflow between design and development, and everything in between. So when we're talking about remote work, I think it's really, really important to understand first. Oh, hold on. I think it's just wrong. Did I remove something? I hope I didn't kill something. Hold on. Yeah, here we go. It's important to think of how do we even work in 2021, right? What does it even mean from the design perspective, from the development perspective? And so we need to set the context first before we move in. And I kind of show this slide all the time, but I think that many of us can resonate with this, right? So every time we do a work, right, it doesn't matter if it's remote or not remote at all, we start somewhere and then we go somewhere. And eventually, hopefully, if the project is successful, we're going to finish the project and move on to the next one, right? However, again, doesn't matter if you're working as a designer, if you're working as a developer, or anything in between, you will never follow a linear path. You will always follow kind of a path that's heavily restricted. And it's restricted by requirements. It's restricted by deadlines, by resources, by people in your organization, by legacy that you have to deal with, and everything in between. So we never just explore all the opportunities, right? We're not like artists who can just express what they feel like or what they want to express, right? We always have to kind of meet a purpose or fulfill a function or serve a purpose that somebody is tasking us with, right? And which also means navigating this really, really difficult path between boundaries within clearly, hopefully clearly defined boundaries and limits. So in reality, when we're designing, when we're building, when we're doing anything creative on the web, we are always maneuvering, right? We're always starting somewhere, right? There is always a starting point, right? And then off we go, exploring all kind of different options and directions. And some of them just not going to work. In fact, most of them are not going to work. And then we have to recover from them and move back and move forward again to then continue and keep going. And there are, in fact, many different paths to success, right? There's no ultimate design decision or ultimate design that works all the time, right? It just doesn't happen this way. Many things can work at the same time. But we're always navigating, trying to find that right path. But that's hard. That's hard because when we look in 2021, the design has become incredibly complex. It's not just, like in the 90s where we design some sort of a print brochure and call it a day. It's really complex because we have to deal with a lot of people and we have to design for a lot of people. And people are inherently complex. They're often multifaceted. They're often very biased. They're very often not objective, but subjective. And they always come with their own context, with their own intent, and with their own expectations. And our interfaces, the design work that we're doing, the development work that we're doing, has to support all of them at the best of our abilities. And I think when I look at this through the lens of 2020 and 2021, one thing is becoming really, really important. In the world of remote work, we realize that we are confined by a very different set of boundaries, which are very much related now to accessibility. Right? Because it's kind of common to think like everybody is living or working in a safe working space where you can design in, calmly, where you're maybe not interrupted too often, when you can have all the access to all the wonderful tools that you have. But all these tools and all these conditions are really difficult to replicate in a home environment at times. And so when you think about accessibility, though, it's a common way to think about accessibility as something that you have to deal with for disabled people, right, or people with disabilities. But this is not true at all, because when we think about accessibility, it's about making our products inclusive and making our work conditions inclusive as well. So you think about things like somebody who has only one arm, right? That's a typical case that you would consider a person with a disability. But it is very common that you might have an arm injury. And you might have one arm because your baby at home is screaming, so you want to take it in your hand, so you actually can type only with one hand, right? So this is why we kind of moved in the design world toward this notion of not just a disability, right, but permanent disability, temporary disability, situational disability. And that goes for touch, for seeing, for hearing, for speaking, and for everything else. So inclusive design, not very surprising really, has become a very, very fundamental part of what we do, and has become a very fundamental part of the design process as well, which was not the case, let's say, 5 years ago or so. However, one thing that I mentioned already is that we really have to support every single intent that people are coming with to us, right? Plus, we also need to encourage action to meet business requirements, which can become very, very difficult, right? Now, when we look at the broad world in which we're living, right, one thing that has become very, very significant, and that's the fact, of course, that everything is mobile. Right? I mean, this is not a big revelation. It has nothing to do with remote work per se, but please bear with me for the next 15 minutes or so as we're kind of moving there. Right? It doesn't matter where you look, mobile is trumping the desktop, and our experiences has to be optimized for mobile. The exceptions are, of course, things like enterprise and maybe education and things like that. But when you look at the time spent on the web or we're looking at digital interfaces, most of this time will be spent on mobile. This is not very surprising, but what is surprising though is that this is dramatic. Like when you look at the mobile minutes spent, we're looking at 80%, 85% of all time digital spent on mobile. It's only some categories like maybe education, right? Or maybe family youth education or things like that, where you see people using desktop a bit more. So very, very strong win for mobile. But it really has a dramatic implication on design. Because when we look at the mobile, we understand now, and again, I know that this is not supposed to be about development, but this is a very important part of us for us to know as designers. And mobile is a spectrum because we have low-end devices, medium devices, high-end devices. And the problem is that if we look, and this is an exercise I like doing every month as a designer, right? I look at the most popular phones every month. Now, if you look at Amazon in the UK today, these are going to be the phones that most people buy. I really doubt that any of you has any of those phones, except maybe iPhone, right? Anybody familiar with Castle F100 dual SIM basic simple mobile phone, which costs exactly £12? Well, almost. That's a cheap phone. Or here's Alcatel 1C, which costs like £45, right? And then, of course, you have a new Apple iPhone 12, which costs £1,200. Now, why am I showing this now again? Well, because when we look into the experiences we're designing, it would be really strange to assume that our experiences can operate or work or look the same on a £12 phone and on a £1,200 phone. Because when we look at the comparison of these phones, we'll find out that iPhone 11, which is not the state-of-the-art phone anymore, right? It's going to be 12 to 20 times faster than those popular phones out there, right? Which also means that when we're designing, one of the really good devices to test on would be something like Android, old phone, which costs around $200, right? Why is it important again for us? Well, because if we are picking, let's say, web fonts, if we're picking, let's say, parallax, or if we're thinking anything that's heavily computational, we need to be aware of the consequences of these design decisions. We can't just say, developer, make it fast, because it's not going to work this way. We kind of have to have the right expectations. And our design decisions have to be influenced by the organizations that we're working for, but also by the customers of those organizations and their expectations. And most of the time, their phones will not be as great as ours. So again, when we look into this design problem, design issue, and the complexity of it, then another facet of it has become performance, right? Where we have a dramatic difference between slow phones and fast phones, and it's only widening over time, which is why for every component we're designing, that's what I see many companies doing these days, there is not enough to just create a perfect Sketch mockup or Figma mockup or Photoshop mockup or, God forbid, InDesign mockup, right? It's just not going to work anymore, because for every component you have to think about a family of components or how it will behave depending on if it's a small screen, large screen, mid screen, or anything in between. It also heavily depends on what kind of connection you have, what kind of memory does your device have, and everything. So when we look into web fonts, we can't just say we're going to use four web fonts, let's say, or 2 different typefaces. We can't do that, right? Instead, we can say, okay, on a 2G connection, we will not use web fonts. On a 3G connection, we will be using some web fonts. And a 4G connection, we will be using web fonts, right? So everything is becoming a continuum. So there is no notion of a perfect mockup, because it's going to change dramatically based on what conditions you want to support. Not even to mention things like light mode and dark mode and everything in between, kind of accessibility or preferences that customers have. And so we really need to have these really difficult conversations, right? Difficult conversations about not having finished artifacts, not having this notion of a handoff where the designer does something, send it over to the developer, and then off we go. It just doesn't work at all in 2021, and it definitely doesn't work in remote work either, right? We'll look into it in a moment, right? So every UI we're designing is in reality more like a spectrum of experiences, right? And we need to accommodate for different devices, network condition, accessibility needs, and personal preferences. So it's really, really difficult. This is why you are all my superheroes, right? Because it's really difficult to design in 2021. And what do we have instead of having these difficult conversations? Well, we have conversations about our preferences, right? What do we like, right? Do we like Sketch or do we like Figma? Do we like Sketch? Do we like Photoshop? Do we like this thing, or do we like maybe this thing, this visual style, or this aesthetics? These things don't matter at all, right? Because when we look into the scope of what we're designing, we really need to think a little bit beyond those conversations. Not to mention, of course, this is the conversation I had just a few weeks ago. What icon do we pick, right? What hamburger icon do we pick? It doesn't matter. Most of the time, it's not going to matter. Just pick menu button and call it a day, because there are things that are way more important that need to be discussed. Another thing we're discussing too much, right? A/B testing. And don't get me wrong, A/B testing is very, very important, but it doesn't convey the full picture, right? Because when you look at the data of big organizations that I tend to work with, right, as well, like over the time, you see the same thing happening over and over. You might be changing things based on A/B tests, based on your heat maps, based on your visual tests and so on. But as time passes by, you're never going to see this cumulative impact of those tests, right? So if you look here, can you tell me, right, how does it happen? How does it work that you make a change, changing a button from green to blue, let's say, right? And then making the font size a bit bigger, and then changing the position and so on. And as you see, right, as you're tracking impact, you see that it's getting better. But over the years, the actual business results grow maybe very, very slowly, definitely not unlike what we should be expecting from cumulative A/B testing results. Can anybody tell me why it's the case? Feel free to write in the chat or just, speak up. Why isn't it like that? Anybody? Oh, it's probably a little bit difficult to track. Yes, so Rosaluna is right. People change opinions and habits, right? Dima is saying, I suppose people get used to the change. Yes. But the other thing is, at every change causes another change. You can't just say that, oh, let's make it from red to blue, and this only thing that we're measuring is going to impress conversion, right? Attract conversion, improve conversions, right? Because people get used to things. That's number one. And number two is, whenever you change something, it might heavily impact not only that one microscopic thing that you're looking at, but also something else on the other end of the UI, right? Which is something we don't even know yet, right? So we have to be very, very careful with running this test. And it's really easy to improve something. There are plenty of variables, as Claudia is saying, right? So here's an example of that. Can you tell me what's wrong about this design? This is a really good way of, improving your sales and improving your conversion. Anybody? Can you see something that's a bit off here, maybe? Wrong color picked, color, right? Buttons. Well, this is a great way of increasing conversion, but this is, of course, a dark pattern, right? So when we look over here, add to basket with insurance, do you need your shoes with insurance? Probably not. But many people wouldn't even realize, especially if we remove the contrast a little bit and make it a little bit darker. So people will actually add insurance to their shoes, right? That's probably not something we want, right? But why not? If we are looking to, at the microscopic change, very much like we did with those buttons, right? Sure thing, it will increase conversion. And if we just keep going this way, we will end up, really abandoning or making angry a lot of our customers long term. So we really need to look at the big picture, and we also need to look at the hidden costs. Because when we look at the dark patterns, and I'm just picking on them in a moment, right? Very often they have dramatic impact on conversion, but they also have dramatic long-term impact that we're not even considering. Like, for example, loss in processing returns, cost of support, sales, marketing, renewed acquisition, and everything in between. So this is why what I see companies doing really today, looking at the work that they're doing on a much broader scope. So there will never be a company of a big size that tracks only conversion. That's just not going to happen, because this is just only one variable. It doesn't mean anything, because you need to track how much time you need for repeat purchase, right? And how much can you reduce it, right? How accurate is your data? So if you're asking for email address, this is my favorite, and this is where I'm getting angry. You come to a page you've never visited before, and you see a newsletter box where they ask you for your email, right? Is it the right time to do that? I mean, I get the idea that we want to get those emails, but we don't want just get random emails. We want good emails that get read a lot, right? That people open a lot, which have very low bounce rate, very high kind of reading rates, and everything in between, right? We don't just want an email. We want a good email. So we kind of need to ask ourselves, when will be the right time to ask for the right email? Time to first share, time to first purchase, upgrade, customer performance metrics, and lifetime value as well. What we want to decrease, though, are, of course, things like sales costs, customer support inquiries, confusing encounters, total cost and ratio of returns, negative reviews, spamming signal, and also improve the turnaround score with somebody who was really, really disappointed has become a very loyal customer over time, right? So again, complexity, right? So we're again living in this world where design is heavily motivated and influenced in many ways by these metrics as well, right? And so what did we end up kind of inventing to come up with this, right? When we think about these design discussions, when we think about design fragmentation, when we think about this complexity of the web that we have to deliver for, right? And this spectrum of experiences I mentioned, what did we invent? Anybody? We invented a particular tool that helps us deal with this complexity a bit better. Anybody? Does anybody know what I mean by that particular tool? Well, it's a bit tricky. It's a bit difficult to kind of find out. We invented design systems, right? Design systems are not new. They're not groundbreaking. They're not changing everything. They existed forever, literally. So this is the Piano Comics published in 1938. And in 1938, they actually had a pretty good idea of what if we actually have a system in place, a workflow in place, a process in place for approving comics. And that would mean we want to rely on components that we're going to design and build once. Well, build meaning just creating those sketches, right? Design once and then reuse across our comics. And so they ended up creating alphabets, right? And kind of different treatments, typographic treatments, visual treatments, right? Graphic design here, right? And then started structuring them. Then they gave them names, very much like what we do with design systems, and really making sure that they all grouped properly. So they actually did this thing where they actually went all across the comics and tried to identify common patterns that kept appearing over and over and over and over again, right? And as a result, they ended up with this design system, right? This is what they come up with, right? And it existed back then, right? In 1938 or so, right? Quite remarkable, if you ask me. So we do the same in design now, right? When we're designing digital interfaces. That's not very surprising. However, when we look into design systems, we see that it's very common to have very typical problems, right? For example, when we look into why we create them, well, it's not very surprising, right? We want consistency, we want increased efficiency, we want to maintain brand standards, right? That's not very surprising. And in fact, when we look into how it usually works, right? How is it delivered, right? It's really often that you end up with an external thing that's living somewhere else. And sometimes it's included in the main code base, but sometimes it isn't, right? And if we think about the process, the reason why many design systems do not work, and please let me know if a design system that you have today in your organization, in your company, in your product is still up to date today. If your design system is still up to date as of this very moment, please write a plus in the chat. If it's not working anymore, if it's outdated, please write a minus in the chat. So we're going to get an idea of where we are. All right, we have a lot of pluses, have a few minuses. It keeps going back and forth. Okay. Well, the reason why design systems very often do not work is when you don't really have a proper process in place at all. When you look at the very bottom, a very successful design system always have a process in place, right? Which we will talk in a moment, right? And the more successful you are, the more likely you are to have a very strict and kind of well-defined, I would say, process when it comes to the design system, right? Luckily, we have tools for that, right? Now, when we look into Figma, when we look into Sketch, when we look into all the wonderful tools like Storybook, for example, they give us incredible tools to really get work done better. That's not very surprising here, right? And I think that every project will have something along the lines of this at some point or not. And in fact, there's also a really good way of tracking how your design system performs, right? Where you can track how often is my duplicate code produced, right? How often do I have any inconsistencies? Another really good test is to ask somebody who has just come to the company to build or design a component based on other components. How quick are they? How consistent is their work with everything that's already designed as well, right? And so this is really, really helpful, of course. So the reason why I bring up design systems in here, because they have become the only working, functional glue that helps us deal with this complexity. And they help us with something else. Just because in every organization, everybody, and these are the wonderful slides by Brett Frost, every organization is driven by different motivations, right? And every part of the team is driven by their own motivations. You really need to ensure that all these teams that you have that are moving in all the different directions are somehow aligned, right? And this is what a design system gives us. Just basic alignment across everybody, right? Both on the large scope of things and also on a small scope of things. So when I look now at this world, and I really wanted to kind of survey a little bit about where we actually stand and why everything is so complicated, right? This is where we ended up with in 2021. When we look into the role of design and UX, great, right? It hasn't been better for years. I mean, when we look into, conversations we had to have like 5-10 years ago about selling design, trying to convince somebody of the importance of design, these conversations still exist, but we don't have to deal with them too much, right? They are fine. People really appreciate the notion of design. At the same time, we see that the role of accessibility improves, right? Because we have all these different, preferences and things that we have to keep in mind, including light and dark mode, let's say, right? It has become better as well. Design buy-in is better. Tooling has never been better. Just look at what is capable with Figma and Sketch. Unbelievable. At the same time, we also have reliable design languages. We look into material design, we can just go ahead and plug it in, right? It might not be a good idea for everything and for every project, but we could do that and we could create a really predictable and consistent design experiences. Design systems are there. Overall aesthetics has become better. If you're designing a new project or if you're rolling out a new project, you probably cannot afford having a bad design. Plus, on top of that, we have incredible browser compatibility. So we don't have to worry about things looking differently in different browsers. But as a result, we have pretty weird place because many of the websites are polluted and blotted and huge and difficult to use and also blotted with, just because of performance. We have accessibility issues still, major issues, and also privacy issues where data is being collected and tracked. So this is why we have GDPR and all these things which actually come in here as well. On top of that, we have this incredible device and design fragmentation, right? Because we need to think about all the different devices and how it's going to work. For me, it's almost impossible to provide accurate estimates. If somebody asks me how much time will we need to make this project work, I have no idea. Right? I really have no idea. It's really difficult for me to make a proper assessment of that complexity, right? Plus, of course, obvious things like communication, collaboration, all these issues that only got stronger in remote work. They've been existing forever, right? But they have become even more punctual in a way in remote work, right? Plus, of course, legacy systems we have to deal with, enterprise, still difficult, this kind of handoff between design and development. How should we make it work? That's exactly what I want to focus on the rest of the talk as well. And then remote work, right? Is it kind of good or is it bad for everyone? Is it going to stay? Is it not going to stay? So for me, this is personally the state of where we are today. Does everybody can kind of agree on that? Do you see it the same way? Anything before we move on to kind of deeper into the process of it all? Does it make sense to you? Again, I always accept pluses and minuses, so that's fine, right? And also feel free to speak up if you want to. So this is why I feel that in this world in which we're living, which is really complicated, we need to have some sort of a guideline of things that work and things that don't work. And that requires us to look a little bit deeper into the design process, right? And that means for tooling and that means for process and for tooling and also for kind of the process between designers and developers. But specifically, I will kind of move towards remote work, but I think it's really difficult to understand that thing alone. And it's probably not as important as the process we have around it. So we first need to get there. So when we look into the process, right? One thing has become quite obvious, right? We want this alignment, right? We often focus on the discussions about tools and process per se, which are maybe not as important, but we need to provide a really reliable way to people to communicate and to avoid mistakes down the line. Now, we learned one thing really well, right, over the last decade or so. We learned that this doesn't work. We can't just have people who design over there, people who plan over here, and people who code alone over here. That just doesn't work. What instead we are going to build, and what most organizations have moved to very quickly, is smaller tactical teams, which are cross skilled, right? So which can, execute different multiple rounds of planning, design, and code quickly and independently, right? This is a very normal thing that we move to, right? Where we have teams, where you have developers and you have designers and you have maybe copywriters and everything in between as well, right? Literally, what we've been trying to do, though, honestly, is moving away from traditional waterfall to agile. And let's not talk about agile, because agile could be anything and everything or nothing, right? But it's become very clear that this cannot work, right? Where we have a very distinct path for user experience, for design, and for development. It has to kind of intersect somehow, or it has to overlap somehow. Because when we actually keep it this way, what we actually have is more like a chasing scenario, right? Where you have designers and you have developers and you have QA all racing on their own, based on their own motivation, right? And this is, again, this is a slide from Dan Moll, and I really like this joke. But the idea being, you have people who are doing the information architecture, they're first, and they move on to the next project. And then you have designers who are taking care of the visual stuff, right? And then you have developers who are sometimes just wondering what the hell are they supposed to do here, right? And this creates this incredible pressure points within the organization to deliver on time. So we changed again, right? We moved from waterfall by saying, let's just have a little bit more overlapping, right? And the way of how we're going to structure it and design it, sometimes you will have more time that you spend together and even more time and then maximum involvement just before the deadline. But very often you will end up with a tapering, right? Where sometimes you have phases where you are deeply involved in something, and then maybe you have designers, maybe you have developers deeply involved as well on the prototype, anything of that kind. But you might remember this thing that I showed in the beginning, where we all explore in the beginning, right? We start somewhere and off we go, exploring, trying to figure out what works and what doesn't work. And that's exactly what then in turn kind of happens. Designers do the same thing, developers do the same thing, everybody in between does the same thing as well, kind of following this very path. And then uniting, kind of creating some sort of sprints, if you like, right? And so if you actually multiply it and iterate it over time, right, you end up with your agile. Right now, we learned that, and there is nothing groundbreaking there, right? But then what it turns out is that this is not enough, because we don't really have this notion, given the complexity of the web, we don't really have this notion of being able to break it down all the time, especially when you think about starting a new project. You have to be even more agile. When you think about the design system being in place and your React storybook being in place, you need to kind of make sure it's even faster. And so some of the people I know ended up with a hot potato process. Anybody heard of hot potato process? Please write a plus if you did and minus if you didn't. So that's essentially taking what we had, right? Taking this idea of we have agile workflow anyway, and thinking about kind of turning it differently, slightly differently. And the idea is this. This is basically a process where ideas are passed quickly back and forth from designer to developer, all the way through the entirety of a product creation cycle. This tapering I was mentioning briefly, right? It exists all the time. All the time. So that means when in a remote setting, you have a designer, you have a developer being on the same Slack channel and kind of really throwing ideas back and forth permanently. But there is no notion of a handoff, because it kind of happens in parts all the time, right? Sometimes designers will do more work, sometimes developers will do more work. But the magical part is, because we're all working in components, we don't need to ever wait for a designer to do something as developers. And on the other hand, as a designer, you don't need to wait for a developer to do something before you do your work, right? Why? Well, because, for example, developers can go ahead on day 0, starting scaffolding the entire project, because they know that you will need buttons, You will need icons. You will need components like accordion and things like that, right? They can actually start building it in an accessible way, while designers actually make sure that the visual part works and the UX will work. But the components, for example, could be scaffolded early, right? Brad Frost and Dan Moll also released this video where they really in detail, go in all the detail, explaining this process. It's, I think, 3 hours video, which shows how they actually work all the time using this hot potato process. But the idea is very, very simple. You just segment your work, and then you try to find those slots where you can do something while somebody else does something else. So again, a developer doesn't have to wait for designer to start working on things. In the same way, like designer doesn't have to wait for developer to start working on certain things. And it's kind of going all the way from the start of the project to the end of the process, right? But of course, it's also quite complex. So this is design system subtasks idea that came from Nathan Curtis. And essentially, what they do is they use Figma and they use Storybook, and they try to kind of create this bridge between the two. And sometimes you will find this really interesting thing where we will create design systems in Figma or in Sketch, right? But what they do is they actually create Storybook mockups or Storybook components in Figma or in Sketch, right? So really trying to gap or match the gap between, or not match, close the gap between design and development. And so it is very common that they would actually start, designers would actually start working in Storybook and then move to Sketch, or developers would actually start looking to Sketch or Figma and then move to Storybook. So all of that just because they're all working all the time together, right? And this is what it looks like, right? It has a kind of 9 steps. So you have a discovery phase, which in remote work, of course, where you can have mood boards and card sorting and dot voting, which is going to happen in Miro or Mural or any kind of collaborative environment, digital environment of your choice. Then the second step is, and this is again coming very closely to what we had in this comic from 1938. The second step is not let's go and design. The second step is let's define name components, right? Because we will have buttons and accordions and tables and so on. And it doesn't matter that you don't have the entire content in front of you, because if you know the content structure, do you have to deal with maps a lot? Do you have to deal with tables a lot? Or is it going to be dashboards? Or is it going to be cards, right? So once you have the type of the content you're going to deal with, even though the client maybe doesn't have any content at all, you can still define components, name those components, and once they are named, developers can go ahead and start scaffolding, right? While designers can go ahead and start designing, right? And this often happens in Google Doc or Dropbox paper or drafting or anything that you like. That's step number 2. The third step then is for developers to go ahead and start scaffolding the project, right? So they go ahead and they prepare everything to be ready just whenever it will be needed. At the same time, designers go ahead and start with a systematic design. And that goes sometimes to extremes, because when you look into those things, for example, systematic approach to spacing, right? Where you don't just have, okay, I'm going to put in 10 pixels or 15 pixels. Well, you create the system in place first, like ranging from XS all the way to XL, right? In terms of spacing, in terms of typography, probably also in terms of colors that you're going to use, the different shades and so on and so forth. And it's very, very important. It's really absolutely critical that the way that you define those things is really matched and mapped in the code. So whenever you're defining something like FreeXL and whatever in the code, right, like you do over here, right, it's absolutely critical that you have a one-to-one mapping in Sketch or in Figma, right? It's just really, really important, which is why designers and developers, when they get together to have a conversation about how the work is going to be, how the workflow is going to be, the naming, right, and the identifying those components is one of the first steps, right? Because they will have to map across everything that you use, right? And then on top of that, of course, you also have design tokens, also with the one-to-one mapping. That means colors that you're using, maybe different typographic treatments, buttons with a shadow, buttons without a shadow, I don't know, headings, things like that, right? Sometimes you also have design docs, which would be kind of a public thing. If you don't want to use Storybook, right? You could actually go ahead and just document whatever it is you're doing in your design decision in a Google Doc or Markdown, draft in Dropbox paper, it doesn't matter, right? I see that sometimes on a big project, you will have this kind of design docs, right? Plus, on top of that, you will be probably trying to be more systematic for whatever comes up next, right? For example, versioning of your components, families of your components, a component on a 3G network, a component on a 2G network, right? How will it change? And again, you have a mapping between what you have in Figma or in Sketch and what you have in your Storybook, right? Eventually, you will also have testing. That's what usually Storybooks is going to be used for, right? But also in Figma, where you can say, I want to plug in random large text, strings of text, right? Or maybe my card component can have a super long heading or super short heading, or maybe I'm going to plug in text from German or text from Chinese or so, and just see how much it changes. Or if somebody forgets to plug in a heading 3, what is it going to look like? So testing happens both in Storybook, right, but also in Figma. And then you also have maintenance, of course, which is where essentially the conversations about the process take place. It could be Jira, it could be Slack, it could be Trello. It's really just up to you. But it's really, really important that you actually have this conversation about how are we going to work when there is a new component that I want to propose. Am I just building it? Am I just designing it, right? Who is going to decide if it goes live or not? Do we need to version it? Do I need to make it a family of components or just one component, right? And so all these conversations are going to happen. And so we do this by creating this little kind of,
So this is the showtime.
right. We're doing this by creating these little boards. So this is what we do for our workshops in Miro, where we have essentially a central place where the important, like the mood boards could live, or just examples could live, or references could live. And across this mood board, you have all these different tables where people can sit. And if I zoom in here, maybe into one of them, hold on, let me just double see. Right, you see that some of them have some kind of attendee cards, and in those cards, people can actually do dot voting. This is what these little feedback boards are for. And so they're moving around across all the different tables, and they actually give feedback remotely. So essentially, the setup is literally like this, right, where you have a central table with a mood board on, right, or it could also be aligned differently, it doesn't matter. Around it, you have tables, which have numbers, like from 1 till 20, I believe, if not mistaken. At every table, you can have up to 4 people sitting, which means they have their own card and they can give their own feedback, take their own notes, and so on. But they all, within a team, also have a shared space where they can design together. In Miro and Mural, I'm sure that most of you have experience with those tools at this point, right? And then once the timer is over and everybody wants to give their ideas or thoughts or conversations, we're still on Zoom having these conversations. But at the same time, we also leave people use the dot voting, where they actually just copy the dots, the green ones, the white one, the black ones, and so on, put them next to mockups, leave some comments, and then move on. Right? There is nothing groundbreaking there, but I think that this is a really, really helpful way of doing this, right? And so this hot potato process works really best because everybody is aligned from the very start. There is never a late conversation about, oh, how do we call this again, right? Oh, what component do you mean? Because you start naming things before they even exist at times, right? Which also helps you to abstract away from naming them based on how they look, right? So you really have to think about the function, the purpose of the components that you're creating. It also kind of enforces this kind of overlap between engineers and designers, right? And it's really difficult, at least in my experience, to achieve this kind of level of alignment for tools and solutions and in the components otherwise, unless you have this kind of process in place. And it can bring you to places where you didn't even think possible, right? This is the one that Airbnb is using, which is kind of a design system search for their components. So it's all connected in a very similar way, where you have your storybook, but at the same time you have your, I think it's, I don't even know, it's not a Figma, I think. I think maybe they're using Figma actually for it. So essentially what they enable you to do is provide filters. Let's say I want to look at my onboarding components on iPhone 6 in Chinese English, French, and Russian, right? And here we go. It just generates these previews, which are not going to be screenshots or anything, but it's something you can interact with, and you can even debug in a browser if you wanted to, right? And they took it to the next level because apparently it wasn't good enough for them. So they started looking at if they can apply machine learning to design systems. And so the idea came from Benjamin Watkins, who said that if machine learning algorithms can classify a complex set of thousands of handwritten symbols, such as handwritten Chinese characters, with a high degree of accuracy, then we as designers should probably be able to classify the 150 components within our system and teach a machine to recognize them. So they built this. I'm sure that some of you might have seen this before, right? Instead of using Sketch or Figma, you take a piece of paper, you draw on a piece of paper the component that you need, maybe the arrangement that you need, given the particular vocabulary that you're using when you're teaching the machine learning to actually do the thing, right? And output a React component. That's it. Designers can go home now, right? So that's incredibly impressive. And this is exactly what you can do once you have this level of structure and system in design. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we need to, break away from the artistic expression and leave everything to machines to design. No, but those routine tasks, the daily routine tasks that we don't need to do anymore, maybe we could output it or offset them to a machine learning algorithm like this, right? So that, of course, all goes without saying that we still need a few more things, and then I'll just make a little break to make it all work. One of the things that we decided to use as well is a thing that we call linear design, because things are named, components are named, but it's not enough to just name them. It's also important to give weights or priorities to them. So this is called linear design, right? You don't have the designs just yet at all. You're basically doing very simple IA here. This is a linear design. I'm going to have a welcome message, header, important callouts, a talks grid, latest stories, TED conferences, about TED, and footer. You probably have guessed that this is a design of TED.com. I wasn't involved in it, right? But actually, the designers of TED.com came up with this idea, I think 6 or 7 years ago. I use it all the time now. So essentially, just you have a gray boxes, and then you give them names. Now, nothing groundbreaking, right? But you don't just give them names. Their height reflects their priority or their importance or their significance within the context of the entire interface. So as you then move from here to desktop or to mobile, right, your job as a designer and also as a developer, and that's a very good constraint to have, is to match those priorities, right? Doesn't matter if it's on mobile or on desktop, you have to match those priorities. So if you have this, right, as a structure of your design, right, you can move to mobile, you can move to desktop, right? It doesn't matter. But these priorities, like 4-1 between the talks grid and welcome message, have to be maintained both on small screen and on large screen, right? Here's another example of that in action as well, right? Where you have your mobile views, right? And then you kind of try to replicate this on desktop. Here's another one where you again go with content priorities first, right? And you look into how these boxes will look later, but you first think about this height really alone. And then your job is really to replicate them across the board as you move from small screen to large screen, right? That's essentially it, right? What we decided to do, and this is kind of what I've been doing for the last couple of years now in the world of e-commerce, we try to abstract away from this notion of design as well. And that goes for things like product pages. Now, this is a very typical product page. I'm sure you've seen it thousands of times. And oops, hold on, it just broke. Here we go. Can you see the screen? Yes, I hope so. Okay, sorry about that. So just a product page, nothing, again, groundbreaking here either. But when you look at the product page, usually it's a very tall page, has a lot of stuff in it, and it's really, really busy, right? So what we try to do is, again, to abstract away from this in a slightly different context, we use a banana test. Now, this is a banana test. Can you tell me what is what here? Now let's try that out. Please write in the chat or just speak up, right? Can you tell me what this is? Essentially, every single word in the UI is replaced with bananas. I also like bananas, so that kind of works for me. So can you tell me what's the difference between these bananas and these bananas? Anybody? Category title, says Ron. Product names, category. Well, if you're living in the commerce world, right, you probably will be saying that there are different kinds of bananas. This might be like a bananas, and this is bananas looks. This is kind of a different set of bananas, right? So it's kind of tabs that we're using here, right? So we have different
זה
sections.
ב5 מתחיל.
Oh, I think that somebody is not muted.
לדירה.
Sorry. Right?
ב5 זה מתחיל.
Yes, yeah, well, this is kind of an upgraded banana indeed, right? So once we have that, okay, so can you tell me what these are? What kind of bananas are these?
אצלי. בכיס.
Right, so that's reviews and ratings. Okay, what about these ones?
זה הכרטיס אצלך, בתוך הטאבלט.
Payment.
הבנתי.
Excellent. Avi, do you think you could mute the wonderful? Thank you, thank you. Anybody about these bananas? Shipping, delivery, excellent. Now, can you tell me the difference between these two bananas? All right, maybe different payment options. Well, multiple payment or one-time payment, excellent. Right, we're pretty sure about this banana, I think. All right, excellent. What about this one? Okay. Now this is getting a bit more difficult. Can you tell me what this banana is? Yes, excellent. So Renate is on fire today. It's indeed size. All right. And then these ones. Yes, Ignace is very good. It's indeed bundle. All right. And then I think we shouldn't have many issues with these bananas over here. This one and this one and this one and this one and probably this one. Oh, by the way, this one is important. Do we know what this is? Excellent. So we can read the interface, well, most parts except the tabs at the top, right? Without having an understanding of any single word on it, because they're all hidden, right? And that's usually a good sign for an interface that it actually works fairly well. If you don't have any text support at all, but basically based on the conditions and based on the patterns that we're using and the components that we're building and we're using, you can tell right away that, I understand what this is. That's probably a good sign, right? And so we do that with this kind of banana test all the time. And the other thing that we do, and I'm going to just briefly show it, right, is really trying to not work around hamburger menus or icons. It's not important at all. What's really more important is the speed of interaction of how somebody gets the information that they need, right? Yes, for CRM, it's probably not going to be difficult, Victoria. You're right. But just a simple example here of the work that we've been kind of looking into. So when you come to an e-commerce page, a product page, right, it's very common to just have no idea. Like you have to collect all the data, like about you see the price, right? But you don't know how is it going to deal with refunds. Can I pay with PayPal or not? When is my item going to be delivered? And so many other questions. So we're looking to really trying to refine this interface to provide a maximum clarity. That's also, by the way, something that we're going to do in the workshop as well, right? When you think about this, right? What information is missing for someone to not have any doubts at all? Like next day collection, order before 2 p.m. is free. Estimated shipping costs for Dublin, Ireland. Is it enough? Maybe not. Maybe we should make it a link. Maybe so somebody can change it if they need to. Maybe we need to explain why it's actually, how it's calculated. Maybe we also need to do the same for taxes and fees, right? Do we need to say sort of the same thing? Maybe not, right? Maybe we can actually change estimated shipping costs and kind of place them in a different place and replace it with home delivery. 1-2 days. Is it good enough? Maybe not. Maybe 1-2 working days. That's a bit better. Maybe 1-2 working days with an explanation of what it means. Or maybe just saying arriving by July 17th. That's probably a bit more obvious, much more transparent, right? Maybe instead of having it a link, the country, we can actually make it a change with the info icon, or just let somebody calculate taxes and payment fees, right? And so it kind of goes all the way to make something as clear as obvious. The same goes for free returns to store, free easy returns to store, and maybe 30 days, right? And maybe just like this with a link, or maybe just like this with a link, right? And it kind of keeps going and going. And so as a result, you end up with pretty much everything covered from the early on, right? And so we're doing all of this, just going very, very quickly and just jumping in Slack and showing this. Is it possible? Can we do this? No, we cannot. Okay, let's move back. And so it's all kind of hot potato process done within a day at most, right? So there is no handoff per se. Does make sense, everyone? Maybe you're working this way anyway. So please correct me if I'm wrong. Right? Okay. And this ultimately kind of brings us to this final part I want to cover in the next 10 minutes, and then we're good. And that's what actually has changed in remote. Now, I spoke like 50 minutes about process and everything in between, just because I think like remote is a very small part of this new process in place. It doesn't really matter if you have an incredible remote process or not, right? It's more important that you have a process, a good process in place. Because one thing that has really dramatically changed everything in our work is this notion of communication. I think that you've seen this before as well, right? You have people, and the more people you have, the more difficult it's going to be to actually deal with communication. Just information will just get lost, right? This is kind of an issue. Now, what's really interesting about this is that although this has become a problem, what you see that there are many studies proving that despite everything that we're kind of used to thinking, like Zoom fatigue and not being able to work from home, there are some conditions where you work better at home. There are some conditions that where you work worse at home. So there was a Stanford University research where they found a highly significant 13% increase in performance from home working. There is also more that home workers reported substantially higher work satisfaction, and there was no difference in the effectiveness. That's what Google found out. Optimal engagement boost is whenever people work at least 60 to 80% from not office, right? But that all somehow based on the fact that you don't have kids screaming around at your home when you're working, right? You can't just say, okay, let's push everybody home, because you need to provide conditions that would work for that, right? So it's all a little bit biased, but in many ways, when you can guarantee the same working conditions from home as you do from the office, you probably will be maybe not, if not necessarily more productive, but at least as productive, right? And so there is a very obvious thing and a very simple reason for it, because if we're not interrupted by meetings all the time, or not interrupted full stop, then we're probably going to work better. Plus, on top of that, we need to have autonomy to do things that we find important and to do things that we need to do, right? Because of the project or so, without having to be anxious about what's going to happen if we do this or if we don't do certain things, right? But what I do see quite a bit in companies and organization is this notion of water cooler moment, right? But the best ideas always come up during the water cooler moments, where people get together in a kitchen and they have a conversation, and then from that conversation something else happens. And Aaron Walter has an incredible talk about remote work, and he is going to be running a workshop on emotional design, I believe. And he said one important thing, which I totally agree with. And he said that in this new setting that we're living in, we often romanticize the serendipity of running into people by accident. But this often leads to interruptions, not brilliant ideas. Great ideas can be anywhere, right? And I think that this is pretty much true, right? Because it doesn't really matter if you're in front of a water cooler or you're on Slack or you're on Zoom, right? It really doesn't matter. These ideas will come one way or the other if you're kind of focused and have autonomy enough to be able to prompt those ideas. But we did come up with a couple of techniques that seem to be working really well. One of them is called deliberate emails, where we're very, very strategic about subject lines, right? So every subject line is chosen based on filter that's applied to it in our email clients. So all of us in the team, and we have 15 people at the moment, we all have different email clients, of course, in place, but I always try to encourage to use the same patterns for subject lines. Maybe I systemize too much, but the idea is to never lose track of unimportant things. So this is what I have. I have the smart mailboxes on the left, and they are based on the subject line that I'm choosing, right? For a new article, for example, or for some front-end issues or anything of the kind. I can always very quickly filter all the important things and filter things that are not important. And so sometimes we take it to extreme, literally. And that also goes for writing emails. So we have prepared templates for Okay, not templates, but small subcomponents for every email that I'm writing. It's around 100 pieces, but then you can send emails in a second. So if I want to send an email to somebody inviting them to write or so, that's what my process looks like. At, I'm typing in an email, the subject line is going to be chosen. I'm using these shortcuts to really create those emails literally within seconds or so. And the same means kind of really replying to those emails goes in the same way. Right? So instead of having to write those emails all the time, kind of rewriting the same things, we just look for things that we can automate. I mean, not everything can be automated, obviously, but if you find yourself really repeating many things, that really helps. That's incredible. We also use trip mode, which essentially allows you to do the focus mode. That means for a particular amount of time, on a particular set of timings, let's say every Tuesday between 8 and 10, I want to automatically turn off my Slack and maybe my Dropbox or anything else. So people can actually work uninterruptedly, right? That is incredible, right? That's really, really helps somebody to actually stay in focus, right? We also use especially for meetings, this little tool called Big Timer. Essentially what it does is, whenever we have a remote workshop, we always keep sharing a screen on Zoom. And then this screen always shows how much time is left. I mean, you also have similar tools in Mural and Miro, but it's just more obvious when everybody has this on their screen. So it kind of has this audio effect. It's very simple. It's free as well. So whenever the time is up, it has this really nice sound effect, and everybody knows that they need to go back to Zoom or they need to start doing something else. That's very, very cool as well. To provide feedback, we use either Screenity or Loom, right? With Screenity, you can send somebody an URL, and then if they have this extension installed as well, they just go to the same URL and they see your notes right away. So you don't have to jump into InVision or anything of the kind. It's just there. That's pretty cool as well. What else? Anything else that's important? We also use Notion, but I think that many people are using Notion at this point. But whenever we have a conversation about anything or meeting, the notes from that meeting always go in here. So we have a very, very clear structure that everybody will be able to reread those notes over there. And because I like really small components, we also use no templates. Because for me, maybe for some of you as well, saying no is very hard, but it doesn't have to be kind of the end of the conversation. So we can also be very deliberate about how we say no and keep the door open for the future. Like, for example, really using these kind of templates. So there is a nice site which is called How to Say No, which provides 31 templates you can plug into Gmail and then use one of them if needed. You know, maybe you don't have time at the moment for that project, but you would like to make it work somehow, right? All these things are really, really important and useful. What else? Yeah, Avi, please feel free to interrupt me at any time. I'm almost there, though. Almost done. Just a few more minutes.
We're good. We're good. I'm enjoying it. There's so many things.
Oh, yes. I try my best here. Another thing that we learned to use really well is Crisp. Crisp is a nice product from Armenia, actually. And what it does is whenever you have a noisy environment around you, it actually eliminates that noise. So even although you might be, there might be a washing machine running or anything, it just eliminates that noise. So it's coming from a good microphone still, right? That's pretty cool and very useful. By the way, I took quite a bit of time to invest in a setup that would work, just because I really feel that when you have a conversation on Zoom, I always encourage everyone on the team, how would I put it? I highly encourage everyone on the team to turn on the camera, video camera. And I know that some people don't like that, some people don't want that, and that's perfectly fine. But I think that it's very important to have the camera on, because then your attention will be focused on whatever the discussion is, right? It will not be doing something else. And the person who is speaking with you will also know that you're not doing something else. But at the same time, you always will be kind of maximally involved in that conversation. But it also means that we don't want to keep conversations very, very long. We have this really simple thing where we have an 18 minutes conversations or 18 minutes meetings. And they're deliberately 18 minutes and not 20, not 25 or 15, just to be sure that everybody knows that we have exactly that time, not a single second more or less, right? And this is the attention that we want from you. That's it. So it's never just a rounded up, never half an hour, never 15 minutes or 45 minutes. It's really kind of going to that being that exact. And so somebody is also supposed to track it. It's not a big deal if we're going over, right? But everybody knows that within those time, we do want to be kind of spending most efficiently that time that we're spending together, right? Just a few more tools maybe here. One of them that we use as well is this time zones FIO. It's a Chrome extension you can install, and whenever you open a new tab, it shows you, you can choose which locations you prefer. It shows you the time, local time in those places. That's very useful as well, right? We'll kind of keep using it quite a bit as well. And in general, though, we do tend to create and encourage using these focus blocks, where in your calendar you type in or you block a time which is a focus block, so nobody can set a meeting in there. And it can be differently depending on your organization, but for me personally, I work really best in the morning, so I try to avoid meetings. And so in my calendar, I usually have my focus blocks somewhere in the mornings, while I'm very happy to have a meeting at 3 p.m. or so. But of course, I have different time zones, have to accommodate for that, totally understandable. But you have to be very cautious and very deliberate, again, about when do you spend your time best and how, right? So that's quite useful. With it comes another thing that we always try to encourage early on, and that's setting the right expectations early on. So if you want to reach me now, like right now, then please call me or use Telegram. I'm using Telegram most of the time for these kind of things. If it's okay with you that I respond within 1 hour, then DM me on Slack. If it's okay for you to get a reply from me within a day, then feel free to paste it on a public Slack or in Notion. And if you want to just send me some thoughts and get an email at some point, then send me an email, right? And everybody also knows that. So once you know this and the entire organization knows about it, they know what to expect and they know how the process should look like and how it should work, right? Yeah, so maybe just one. Yes, I'd be happy to share the slides, Scott. No problems at all.
Yeah, so I'll send an email to everyone participating with the slides.
Excellent, thank you. Then just a few more notes, and then I'm happy to jump into Q&A. We realized one thing very quickly. So we do like online workshops. I mean, I fell in love with online workshops. I really love them. And if I had an opportunity to choose between an in-person workshop and an online workshop, frankly, I would always go for online. I really love them. And we can talk about it in the Q&A later as well. And so on Smashing, we also run online workshops on design and development and other things. And we learned one thing very quickly. So we spent like, I don't know, we have like 40, 45 workshops at this point. And we learned that whenever you have something on Zoom and you have your material maybe prepared, for in-person thing, online is always slower, and it seems to be 10 to 15 to 20% slower. At the same time, you always have this feeling of Zoom fatigue at some point, because whenever you have a conversation on Zoom or like a half an hour call, to me, in terms of draining resources, it feels more like a 1 hour conversation in person. So we try at least, we try to never have more than 2 Zoom calls a day. I know that some of you might be having like 10 or 7, right? But again, we need to be very, very cautious about our own productivity and how good we are with our time. But as we have those calls, and this is again something that Aaron Walter said in his talk, he keeps a separate doc for every type of meeting or for every client. And so every time there is a conversation with a particular person about that particular project, right? It could be a Notion card or Google Doc or Dropbox paper. They just always adds notes about what they decided and so on in the same doc. So whenever the conversation has to happen again, or whenever they want to look back, instead of going through thousands of documents, go through the same doc from top to the end, right? Yes, and maybe the final one is, it's kind of funny that I see a lot of people really struggling trying to find work-life balance, and I totally do as well. But the thing is, one thing is very, very certain. I don't know how many times you've been in this situation, but I've been there like thousands of times. If you do something late, you will wake up the next morning and realize how horrible the result was of what you've been producing over the night. So it doesn't really help. So instead, I really try very, very hard to distract myself from doing things late, and instead just moving in and pushing it to the morning. It's usually way more efficient and way more productive. And finally, if you have a conflict in the team, one thing that really works as well, like maybe somebody wants A and you want B, right? One thing you can always do is say, how important is it to you on a scale from 1 to 10? For me, it's like a 4. And if it's a 9 for the other person, then give them their way. Maybe that's, it's not important for you anyway, right? So this is a very simple way of how to deal with these things. So what does the future hold? When we look into offices, it seems like whatever data you're looking at, whatever article you're looking at, it seems like we're never going to move away from this notion of remote offices. It's more likely that we're going to end up in this world where we don't really have central offices, but many satellite offices. And this is what Google has started doing recently and will be doing as well. But remote will always be an option. And so to me, this is a good thing because I've seen so many things progress in such an incredible pace. A very simple example of that is the government system in Georgia, the country, not the state, where they couldn't pull off creating an administrative system fully digital for a decade. And they managed to do that within 3 months because of pandemic and nobody could go to work, right? Well, in the public office. And so this is an incredible acceleration. So everything that we're doing is kind of accelerating. These problems I showed, this complexity that I showed, it's accelerating in the same way like processes, complexity, and also tooling improves, right? So this is actually a great opportunity for us to reinvent and rethink what we're doing. So with that in mind, I'm very kind of almost excited to see what is going to come up next. So to come up with a little summary here, spoke a little bit too long maybe. So creative process is never linear. It always needs some buffers. We need to have conversations about alignment and not necessarily the tools. We need to always create overlaps between design and development teams. If you can't parallelize the work, so designers don't have to wait for developers and developers don't have to wait for designers, we need to do that. There's this Kano model. I think that many of you have heard about it. I didn't mention it because of the time, but the idea is basically we want to drive people towards kind of emotional connection with our products, with our interfaces. And one of the ways of doing that is by producing good design. And this is why many companies understood that it's not viable to compete with other companies based on features alone. It's much more effective to work on design and improve design. And this is why we saw a breed of design-driven products showing up, right? Like, for example, Airbnb. Just because competing with design is much easier and simpler than hiring 1,000 or hundreds of developers to improve features. Avoid distractions with 18 minutes meetings and focus blocks. Encourage everyone to turn on the camera. That might be a good idea. Not necessarily audio, but this is the camera. Keep a separate doc for every meeting. Estimates are very, very hard. There's this really funny formula, 2 PR plus 2 weeks, which essentially is, because everybody is moving in a kind of not linear path, but kind of moving around the finish line, right? Like we saw this in the agile slide, right? We're kind of moving across the circle most of the time, and 2 weeks gives us a buffer to be able to produce something that's viable. So 2 PR plus 2 weeks. And then finally, exposure hours with customers, essentially having an open conversation with customers every now and again, regularly. It always helps you stay on track. So that's the way we are working in 2021. And I hope that some of those things were useful. With this in mind, meow, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Meow, Vitaly, great, everyone clapping. That's really nice. Thank you.
Thanks, Avi.
So there was a lot of questions in the chat, but I would love people to unshare your screen so we can see everyone.
Sure.
And I'd like people to come on camera and ask questions, or maybe add more tips. How are you guys doing it at your workplace? What did you find in the last year that is useful for you? Because we're here in a learning environment and we want to learn from other people's experiences. So, anyone?
Excellent. From my end, I think just before everybody jumps in, these are things that work for me, right? They don't necessarily going to work for you, but I see many companies really struggling to find what might work for them. And so if it gives you some ideas or some, at least pointers of what would be worth trying out, then I'd be very, very happy.
Okay. So anyone wants to jump in and say hello?
So I'm going to just plug in my LinkedIn URL. So for those of you who were asking.
Yeah. I see Zolene. Zolene, you're outside. How you doing? where are you at?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Enjoying it from New York City.
Oh,
Excellent.
that's cool. We're
Oh,
missing. We're
That's where I'm
missing.
at.
That's fantastic.
York.
That's another thing that we noticed, by the way, as well. I mean, this is the magic of remote stuff. This is the magic of online. We see in our workshop people going for running just in the first part of the lecture and then coming back after the running, taking a shower, eating something, and then joining for the remote session in Miro Mural. It would never be possible in person, like ever. So this is why I'm really much in love with online stuff.
So any people have a question or want to add a comment? Naline.
So I have a tip. What was a game changer for us till remote work is there is that we have a 15 minutes long meeting every morning where everyone from the team is there and we just say, okay, that are the tasks that need to be done today, tomorrow, and this week, and who is doing what. So we kind of look at the preferences of the team members, and we also take the time so that everyone has this overview of everything that is happening and needs to happen, so that we are sure everything is being actually done on time and from someone that enjoys this particular task. So this was a game changer for us.
Yes, absolutely. So this is, in many ways, what we're trying to do, I guess, is to replicate the stand-up experience we have in person online. I do see two differences, though, two kinds of things that work for companies. Sometimes companies prefer video stand-up and sometimes text stand-up. It really probably depends on the culture and how people are used to be working. But it's very interesting to see those two differences. Indeed.
Okay, anyone else? More?
I have a question about meetings. So you've brought up an interesting point of having 18-minute meetings, and I'm all for having shorter meetings. But what is your advice for when meetings go over the 18 minutes?
Yeah, well, that depends, of course, on how strict you want to be. Now, in our case, it's not important that they finish at 18 minutes, but it's important that everybody has a shared understanding that we are over time, right? So it's kind of more important, even if it goes like 25. Everybody knows that actually we don't want to just go to an hour or so. It was supposed to be 18, but people also schedule things around, right, to make sure that they don't sit in there for like an hour or so. Usually it helps, and there's always one person who kind of tries to nudge somebody to say, do we need another meeting later to speak about this? Or can we wrap up at this point? So there is always somebody who is kind of moderating. But it's more like this alignment. So all the things that we try to do with email, with meetings, with the way we work, with naming things, it's all about this notion of alignment, I think. For me, this is the most important part, because I don't want to have somebody expecting something else and reverting back and changing something just because they didn't understand or were not aligned with the entire team. That's, I guess, the most important part.
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm sorry. Hi. Thank you for hi. Great presentation. Oh my God, so much good stuff. Wow.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you. My question is in regards to emerging technologies, specifically the technologies that are still nascent, that enterprise companies that can afford to, experiment with are doing. For example, the more immersive technologies. I know VR is not a big thing, right? But the more immersive technologies, what about like holograms and stuff that are coming? What do you see in the next 3 to 4 years that we're going to be using that we're not using now?
Well, that's a very interesting thing, because if you think about remote work and kind of some part of our work staying remote, then those things could be incredibly useful in many different scenarios. It'd also be very useful for education, remote education, for example, or even for architects and so on. And it feels like, to me, we are almost there already. So whenever I see architects, they try to create these 3D models, and they very often will be using something like VR to be able to visualize it. The same goes to medicine as well. However, I do feel that in some ways, it's kind of within at least the time that we had so far, it kind of stayed within the context of, these particular niche things. So it's not really something that we as, interface designers, maybe some of us, would be using every day. And it doesn't seem like it's something that people are really comfortable with using every day either, like in general. Because when you think about, for example, using your hands to navigate or move things around or something like that, it's just faster, incredibly much faster with, typing or clicking, right, at times, instead of using your hands all the time. So it might be, of course, also fast to swipe left and right and so on, but it's also requires a bit more effort. So frankly, I couldn't see really or spot this technology is becoming an absolute mainstream. They're probably, at least for now, they're staying within those restricted niche industries, but they're used very heavily there. So I'm not sure if this is an answer you were looking for, but this is my thoughts on that.
Can I just piggyback on that regarding that? I'm sorry, it's a part B to that. So with regards to digital identities, right? Staying in line with the whole emerging technologies thing. So we are now going to be soon having we have this now, the ability to create like sort of alternate identities and avatars and virtual beings that actually help us to express sort of different parts of our personality. Do you see that as being something that would be welcome either by you or companies?
That's a good question. Frankly, I don't really have much experience around that, but I totally think that within the games space or within any kind of community space, really, it could be very, very useful. So if you ask me, I don't think that we should be expecting, the online conferences or this format, like online meetups or online conversations, to be disappearing anytime soon. I don't think that is going to happen at all. I still think that, of course, that in-person things will come back, but this will probably stay for a while with us. And when we look at what we have at the moment, in many ways, even if I look at the camera now, most of you are very distorted 720p pixels, right? Except Avi. There's always light shining at Avi. But most of the time, it's not enough, I think. We could be probably more expressive. And so the question is, if Zoom, let's say, opens up and you'll be able to plug in something on top of Zoom and make something like 3D avatars in Zoom, who knows where it will take us? I mean, we had Snapchat for a while. I think it's still a thing, is it? With all these filters and stuff, maybe. So we do want to have some sort of expression of ourselves. I just don't know, as of now, if it's still going to be like a mainstream thing, or is it going to be just something that some cool kids do?
I'm not sure that we will go there. I'm not sure that technology will get us to, I don't know. What do you guys think? But I feel like technology is not going to turn us into avatars, and like we want to still feel the human part of it. And maybe it will be some sort of a niche. I don't know, but I don't know. Who knows?
Maybe.
Christine, you want to say something, or we'll move to a question from Christine?
Yes, sorry.
Go ahead. Yes,
I have a quick question about working late and time zones. How do you manage having meetings at 10 p.m. every night and sometime even at 7 a.m. in the morning in the same day when you work across with teams all over the world?
Wow. So luckily I'm not in that position. The worst I have is late meetings. And usually I try to not have any meetings in the morning, but because I'm located in Germany at the moment, that's not necessarily a problem. Most of our team is actually within Europe, but most of our colleagues and partners are in the US. So that's kind of easy for us, really. But even in that case, frankly, I remember vividly the time when I went to, like every time I went to Japan or New York, when I changed my time zone, I was so relaxed because I was sleeping while everybody else was doing my work or some other work. And so I would wake up and the work is done and I can continue doing mine without being interrupted all the time. So maybe it's all about I would probably start with establishing a process to avoid you staying late at like 12 at night, right? To figure out what should be happening next. And so that means really saying, okay, how are we going to do this? Like, when do you want this and when do you want this to be delivered? And how are we going to, work throughout all of this? It's all about the process in the end. I'm all for systemizing things, maybe a little bit too much in my life. I even have checklists for everything in life. So Avi knows that.
I want to talk with Scott. He has a 2 in the morning meeting with Hong Kong.
Oh,
Where are you, Scott? Hello, Scott.
maybe
Okay, so he
maybe
heard
Scott
that-
has a meeting call in Hong Kong now. That would be
Ah, could
sad.
be.
Yes.
Hey, Scott.
By the way, dear friends, I just sent a link to one of the sites, which is actually getting bigger and bigger. It's called We Work Remotely. So if you're starting out and maybe you just graduated, or maybe you just looking for a job or so, it actually features only companies that look for remote workers. So, and it's pretty large. I mean, pretty large, both in the UX and design and everything in between content. It's pretty cool.
I can share that coming back from, well, it seems that like the pandemic is slowly releasing here. People are going back to offices. People prefer to go back to offices. It seems that there's like they do half days or half the week there and half the week at home. So there is some sort of a revival.
Yes,
and we will come back to.
Yes, but I think you have to be kind of a little bit cautious there, because it's something that people wanted to do for a very long time and now they can, right? But will it stay the same way? That's a question. I don't know. It's like, I'm sure whenever the first in-person conferences get announced, oh yeah, this is going to be a blast. Tickets will go like this. But, 2 years from now, who knows if it's actually going to stay, because it's actually just more convenient, for companies to send you to an online event instead of sending you to another country.
No, people are not going to go for it. People are going to want to go out of the house, I think. I don't know.
Well, let's see what happens. I don't know. It's all. I think that both are going to stay. Like both
Hybrid.
options are not going to.
That's the word. Hybrid.
I'm not sure. So let me ask you something, dear friends who are still here in Zoom. If there was a conference announced today,
good question.
great lineup and great timing, good price, very inclusive lineup, very interesting topics and all, and they have on-site COVID tests right before you enter, would you buy a ticket today? Please write a plus if you would. Oh, a lot of pluses.
1 minus.
Okay, interesting.
Few minuses. Okay.
Okay. Well, when we run the survey,
Frem?
I would like to answer this question or
Go
add
ahead.
something to this discussion, because I started liking remote conferences. I mean, we needed to go to remote conferences because there was no other option. But I had the chance to attend, I don't know how many workshops, UX meetups, conferences in the last 13 months. I would have never been able to, and I would have never gotten the budget to go there. I was on a conference in the US, on a workshop with Jim Kalbach on the US, and a workshop in the US, and one in London, and one here and there, and across the world. And I learned so much. So I missed the one-on-one on-site discussions, yes. But if you would ask me what I prefer, I would prefer the online stuff, because it's only 700 euros to attend the conference. No hotel, no flight, no climate change, pollution stuff. All that stuff is not involved. And I just need to invest these 8 hours for the conference, or 2 times 4 hours in 2 days. Fine. And on the other during the other time, I can stay with the family, I can work, and so on. So I'm very much plus or for these online stuff. I learned to like it a lot, so I think it's good.
Yeah, and as Agnes saying, you have access to recordings as well, which you don't have in real life. I mean, at least not immediately. I mean, real life.
And one addition is what I also like. It's listening to the talks and having the chat in parallel, which was when we were on site. I was using the Twitter stream and checking the hashtag, what others say about the talk and discussions. And now we have these chats in parallel, and we can discuss stuff, exchange links while listening. So I think this is pretty good. I like it. But it's personal opinion, of course.
It's not
It's
what
actually
from
a
you,
really
one of
interesting
us.
opinion. Yeah, I like that. I mean, that's I thought always the power of the online stuff is that we have a chat, but I didn't recognize that there is also the Twitter in real events, but it's not as effective as it is. So good to know. I wasn't okay.
Yeah,
Also, for introverts, it's difficult. I like this. I'm so sorry. For introverts, this is really important that I'm very sociable. I have to get on stage and do events and talk and everything, but this allows for more democratic discussion. I mean, it's like you don't have to feel like if I take a mic and stand and ask a question, is everyone going to look at me? It's like this is more inviting and
inclusive
so
in a way.
yeah, and I get better content this way. I can't get this level of content at live events. You can't hear, or the slides are.
Ilan, you wanted to say
you never have a
something?
problem with lighting. That's true. So slides always look great if they're well designed.
Yeah, I totally agree with the two last friends here, because being at home is much more like free, intimating, and you know we're on our own place. But of course, all the disturb. You see my child here playing with me during the conversation, and it's once it bothers you, it's like it's not good. But if you agree to be like involved in the part of being at home, it's your family here, so it's fine. It's totally fine. I think we can change our thinking about what the connection is. But there is a lot of buts, because in a real meeting we have this emotional kind of connecting thing that I think it's like not ready yet. I don't know, maybe not in Zoom, but there are some software interactive meeting kind of places where you can kind of put yourself on the screen close to some team of people and you can hear them more, or here's the stage, or you can draw a virtual environment and be there. It's like kind of trying to be closer to physical thing. But what about the physical thing? It's the same emotional level that we can like feel each other, that it's not, it's like I feel that it's still a screen. And I know I've been with you guys, Avi and Vitaly, in physical environment, and I know the difference. And it's also a question if this virtual thing can be the same level, because when I out of the conference, which is physical, I feel that I so much fulfilled energetically and have so much impact in my mind and thoughts and what I'm gonna do with it right now. So in these virtual things, yes, I have a lot of places I've been for last few months, but what is the real impact of them? It's still different. It's still not there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Well, I think in many ways it also heavily depends on the equipment we have. So I think as of right now, when we're looking to most Mac devices, even the camera is really awful. That really kind of shows when you have a conversation with the client or so. That's, you really have to invest in a good camera at this point. But maybe 5 years from now, when everybody has a decent microphone, decent setup, decent lighting, decent things, maybe this will happen. It will be maybe a little bit better, but yes, it is of course just different. It's just, I think it's like with everything else, there are pluses and minuses in both, but I don't think that we will be giving up on this format anytime soon. So there's also much more acceptance for this format. I think that if we had a choice 5 years ago between an in-person meetup or an online meetup, I think that many people would prefer this, but many people would prefer in person. But at this point, it's just more accessible for everyone. For people who don't want to travel, people all around the world, you make it accessible to everyone, which is cool.
I'd like to see if there's any more comments about remote work or people can participate in the discussion. We're going to end in a few minutes. I feel good energy. I feel like I want to see the recordings of the conversation we had earlier, Vitaly, because you shared a lot of stuff, and I'm happy for this event. And of course, guys, it's on YouTube, and I'm going to send the links later as well.
There's also a question from Rohan. Will doing remote work in the future reduce the kind of exposure like we had before the pandemic? Remote
Kind of
work.
exposure. Can you explain, Rohan, what do you mean? Unmute yourself so we can hear, or... No?
Nope. Okay. No worries. Well, what's coming up next on your UX salon?
Actually,
Well,
Aaron
Lauren
Walter, you mentioned him. We're gonna have UX on coffee later this month. So he's basically just coming in to have a chat and have coffee with people from across the world. He's a great design thought leader, and you guys are welcome to join in as well and have a conversation. It's going to be just a casual conversation. We don't know where it's going, but everyone bring a cup of coffee and we have it together.
Always worth going to.
Yes, Laura, I see your coffee or tea. Okay, so anyone else wants to say something?
Well, if not, I'll be very, very happy to see you all, or at least some of you, at the Forms workshop, which I believe I will be announcing shortly.
Please follow on Instagram, and then you get the first notice when we're going to announce it, and you can register. Just look for UX Salon on Instagram, and I share great things over there, funny things and interesting things from UX world. And that's it. Thank you all for participating. Thank you for joining us from across the world. Thank you, Vitaly.
Yes,
wow.
Thank you all. Thank you so much, everyone, and see you next time.
Bye for now.
Bye for now.